Welcome to episode 1 of the Mountain of Mastery podcast. This is your founder, Gon Declercq, and in today's episode, for episode 1, I want to delve into the mission of this podcast. Where do I see it going long term? And in order to do that and explain the why behind it, I think it'd be good to go into my origin story and link some events in my life experiences to why I decided to make this podcast. And that will give some more context to the why behind the actual podcast and what purpose I hope it serves. So a good starting point, I think, would be to talk about my core values. So I took a test the other day called the Dr. DeMartini Values Test. And at this point in my life, at 22 years old, my main values are bodybuilding, entrepreneurship / business, and learning. And I'd like to also categorize that as mastery. So trying to master something, like learn the ins and outs of different crafts, skills, and just becoming an all-round more competent human being. Okay, so I thought I'd break up to those 3 parts. I'll delve into each one separately. But first, I also want to talk about one more topic, which is philosophy. All right, so I think this is one of the things I'm most interested in, and it kind of links to the learning. And since a young age, my mom's always told me I've always wanted to know why. Since a young age, I'd be like, Mom, why is this happening? What does this mean? What does that mean? And I just think fundamentally, at the core of me, unless I get hit by a baseball bat really hard, I'm just a naturally curious person, and I hope to always be that way. And I think a podcast is the best medium for me to share this inclination to give the best amount of value into the world long term, because I don't think I'll stop. I think this is something which I'm genuinely interested in. Years and years have shown me it's true, and I can only imagine it's going to keep the hunger for learning and wanting to know more and learn more is going to keep growing as I get older, because it has in the last recent few years. Okay, so a particular story I want to start with, to go all the way back, is when I was 9 or 10 years old. And this story might seem a bit random, but it will make sense, trust me. So when I was 9 or 10 years old, I remember walking to the movies in a park nearby my house called Dundonald Park in Wimbledon, in London. And when I was walking, I just distinctly remember contemplating what happens when you die, right? And obviously, even at that age, I'd heard of death and I'd heard of the concept, but in my mind, I remember actually imagining somehow what it was like to not be here anymore. And it terrified me. And I remember I went to the movies, and obviously I didn't know what this was at the time, but I'm pretty sure I had a panic attack. So I remember from that moment, that thought of what happens when I die, and then also after that, it might have been before this or after this, I'm not too sure. I remember distinctly that my house number was 37, and my parents were 37 at the same time. I did the maths, that would have mean I was 7 years old at the time, but I remember crying about the thought of them dying. So I think what this story seems to serve is just this idea of death and fear of it. And since then, I can't even imagine death in the same way. I feel like I have a mental callus in my mind where I can't put my head in the same space because it was so scary. And this might seem like a completely random story, but I feel like it's had a cascade of events which has led me to where I am right now. And I think that's actually a big reason for my curiosity, because fundamentally, death is the complete unknown. No one has been back to tell the story, right? So I think this was a big reason for me being interested in philosophy, which I actually went on to study at university. And it links with just wanting to know why, why things are the way they are, why people are the way they are. Is this by design? Is it not? Etc. So hopefully that story gave some relevant context. And back to the 3 main values I have. I'm going to delve into each of them to give more context to me as a person. So the first one we're going to go into, which links to bodybuilding, which is number 1, which is sport. Right, so I've always viewed myself since a young age as an athlete. that was the thing where I guess, some people are good at math, some people are good at sciences, some people are good at making things. My thing that I was just from a young age better than pretty much all my peers at was sports. And I was lucky enough for my parents to allow me to try a bunch of sports when I was younger, taekwondo, swimming, running, ping pong, tennis, even skiing. So I've been very fortunate to have tried a lot of sports, and I had a very good natural inclination towards them. And I usually was one, if not the best. And so I think from this, it had like a reinforcement loop that I felt good when I was being shown appreciation, or, well done, good job, because, you win at sports. Like, that's where I feel like I got my validation in a sense from, if I peel back the layers of the onion. And that went, as I was young, I tried lots of different things. The thing that I landed on the most was rugby. So I played for my local club. I played for my primary school. I was the captain. And then I went to secondary school. I went to 2 different schools in secondary school. Moved when I was 14 to another one. And in those, they were both very competitive teams. To give context, both were one of the best teams in the entire country. Schools in England is very competitive, if you know about the rugby there. And that was the main focus. So I'll be training multiple times a week. We'd have a game pretty much every weekend on a Saturday. Sometimes when I got older, it would be on a Wednesday and a Saturday. And that was a massive part of my life. Okay. And I remember when I was 13 years old, or maybe I was 12, in that first secondary school I went to, they went round and they gave a card. And they said, write down for your upper sixth self, which is year 13, so when you're 18 years old, write 3 things that you hope to have achieved by then, right? And if I remember correctly, I wanted to get good grades, good GCSEs, which ended up happening, got all A's at least. I wanted a hot girlfriend, and as I'd never had a girlfriend up to that point. And the last one was to be a professional rugby player, or to play for Harlequins. And interestingly enough, I remember this because I never got handed that card back because I'd moved schools. But I guess me thinking, they're telling me I'm going to forget, it assigned meaning to that moment, and I still remember it to this day, 10 years later. Anyways, when I was 16, I ended up actually playing for Harlequins, which is a professional rugby team. And also the relevance of that previous story is I wanted to be a professional rugby player. Like, when people ask me, what do you want to do when you're older? I would say I want to be a professional rugby player. And I was so motivated to get into Harlequins. I had some success before. I got into the county team, Surrey Rugby, and we won the nationals at under 15. So our school was the best team in the entire country. And at 16, I managed to get into Harlequins, which is a rugby academy, and they're an actual professional team. If you're 18 and you're good enough, you get a contract to play for the professional team. So here was a big changing point in my life, because up to that point, rugby was such a big part of my life. And I had 2 big injuries that year. I dislocated my elbow. I sprained my ankle twice. So I was out for probably in total about 4 to 5 months of the whole entire year. And I got to play in the last tournament, which was this tournament called the Wellington Tournament. And I thought I played really well. And shortly after that, they have the decision, go into the 6th form team or year 12 and year 13. Did you make the under 18 team? And I didn't, right? And I remember my dad came into the room and he told me, you didn't make it. And I was literally crushed. You know what I'm saying? I was literally crushed. And even to this day, it's many years later, obviously I still remember it. So it must have had some kind of significance. I remember after that, that was probably one of the biggest turning points in my life, because suddenly this that I had of becoming a professional rugby player wasn't so clear in my mind anymore. I didn't really know what I was doing. The world seemed, before it was a straight path, very clear, very orderly, and now it was just chaos, right? And so it was this point again that I got interested in philosophy again, or more, right? I'm not trying, I guess there's different names, but you could say I had almost an existential crisis at age 16, because suddenly I just couldn't see the meaning in anything or the purpose, while struggling to find it, because before it was so clear to me, and now all of a sudden nothing really made sense. It wasn't so black and white anymore. It was all grey. All right, so I was drifting around for a bit here. I tried to do the rugby again. And it was from here that I actually had a rugby coach. And this rugby coach, I went to him because I was struggling to get into the under-18 squad at my school team. And I was struggling. I was on the bench sometimes. I'd be playing sometimes. And it was so frustrating to me. And I went to him and we had a deep conversation. And that conversation is probably one of the, changed my life, completely changed my life. And he offered, look, let's get some structure back here. If you come to the gym at 7 a.m. on Tuesday and Thursday, we're going to do a full body gym split and I'm going to do it with you. And so we did that. So I must have been 17 at this time. And since then, 5 years later, I have never missed a beat since. I've only got better and better. I've been more and more consistent. When I say more and more consistent, I mean like I literally have not missed a beat. So I said I got more and more. I went from doing it Tuesday and Thursday to Monday, Wednesday, Friday in lockdown. I was lucky enough to have a home gym. And from there, when I was no longer doing rugby, I went all in on bodybuilding. I'd always had an interest in physiques, even when I was playing rugby up to that point, but I'd never been able to go all in because rugby, you have the trainings and you have the game on Saturday, so that means you can't gym on the Friday or the Saturday because your body's so beaten up. And other things, right? I was doing running at the time, track as well on a Tuesday and Thursday, so I was not giving my body the ability to recover to be actually doing a proper bodybuilding split. No way. And the training is slightly different from rugby to bodybuilding. So I started doing bodybuilding and I love it, right? Throughout lockdown, the world obviously was completely different. School's online and a lot of people having a difficult time, and while obviously it wasn't easy, the gym absolutely was my sanctuary there. Lucky enough to have a home gym. We had a barbell and, a little kind of plastic bench press and some light dumbbells. And that's all I needed, right? And I'd be in there 2.5 hours pretty much every single day, or like 6 days a week, I believe. 3 days on, 1 off, push-pull legs. I fell in love with the process. Then there was a gym, King's Gym nearby. And it was actually I was lucky enough to be nearest to one of the best bodybuilding gyms in the entire country. Luckily, or unfortunately, that gym no longer exists. They moved it and it's become a lot more commercial now. But when I was there at that point in time, it was an environment that will forever have an impact on me. It was insane. The standards, the energy, it was amazing, right? And that was my proper introduction to British bodybuilding. And I feel like it's played a big part in me continuing to do bodybuilding and falling in love with it, like really falling in love with the process. And since then, I got deeper and deeper. I got more methodical with the training. I learned more. I studied more. And, I got my first coach in university. I prepped for my first show. And, throughout time, I was becoming more and more diligent with my nutrition. By the time I was near the end of my first year at university, I was really tracking every single macro. And I've literally become more and more methodical since. So it's just been like a snowball that was started, I guess. I was already gymming before, but the snowball that has rolled until today was started when I started with that rugby coach of mine. And it's crazy to think how far we've come already. So that's a huge part of my life. And right now, my goal, I've moved to Houston, Texas to pursue bodybuilding. My goal is to be in the waterfall, right? If you want to be an actor, they say go to Hollywood, right? You have the best chance of being around the waterfall where the action's at, and you have the best opportunity to make it, right? And the same thing, I've seen this again in my life. When I did cross country when I was younger, I'd run with the faster runners and it would make me faster. It would show me the limits and I'd be able to push harder and it would motivate me more. In rugby, when you're in an elite environment, there's a certain level of aggression and focus that you need to perform at that higher level, right? In academics, I remember being in the first secondary school and it was so much more competitive than the second one, right? And I remember getting straight A's, whatever you'd call it. It was straight A's. They had a different name for it, but you get the point. And everyone there was smarter and the standards were just high. And then I went to the other school and they were more of a sporting school and the people were not as driven academically. And I remember it was almost cooler to not try as hard. I remember my grades, because I remember the whole first year I went to that secondary school, I'd pretty much learned everything already the year before. So my standards dropped a bit, and then it took me a while just for GCSEs to really lock in again, and then I got the grades back up. But point being, and I've seen this again when I went to UCSB for college, in the first year, I was just getting used to the system. I was obviously super focused on bodybuilding, and university wasn't the big priority. But then I met people that, I remember meeting my girlfriend at the time. She had never got a B in her life, or even an A minus. Or maybe she got one A minus. But just her having that standard made me think, well, I know I'm a competitive person. Like, if she can do it, I can absolutely do it. I can absolutely do it. So then from then, I pretty much didn't get another B for the entire time I was at university. So yeah, just lessons learned there about standards. And if you want to pursue tech, you go to Silicon Valley. So for me, at this point in my life, I decided I want to go all in on bodybuilding. That's why I graduated a year early. And out of the best bodybuilding places to move, I knew the UK wasn't for me. Right? I have an American passport. I was born here, so I knew I wanted to be in America. And the main spots for my analysis would be Florida, New Jersey, Las Vegas, Texas, and maybe Los Angeles. But out of all of them, I feel like for my goals right now, the next stepping stone, the best place to be was Texas and Houston specifically, because I want to be around people that are definitely ahead of me, right, making a living off bodybuilding. And I didn't want to be around people that are so far ahead of me that there's just no way I can even interact, right? Like full-on Olympians, right? But people that are maybe IFBB pros or just slightly ahead of me that I can really maybe get to know, because I feel like as Santa Barbara at UCSB, and even in secondary school, I didn't really know that I love bodybuilding, especially in secondary school, and the passion grew and grew and grew throughout UCSB. But in Santa Barbara, there was a handful of bodybuilders, but no one at like the level that I wanted to be at. Like no one really good, right? So I felt like I was doing something in isolation, and I know that the best is brought out of you when you're in environments where it's competitive. I'm a competitor at heart. I'm competitive, and I know that I thrive when I'm in environments with other people who are ambitious, doing what I want to do. Right? It's only going to make me better. I know that for a fact, and I know I'm only going to make them better. So taking that risk to move out here on my own was a big risk, but I felt like it had to happen in order for me to be at the level I want to be at. So anyways, goal is to go all in on bodybuilding. I've had a bunch of setbacks in the last year, which I'll get onto, I'm sure, in maybe future podcasts if I'm talking to specifically bodybuilding guests. But I'm positive, and I know that I'm going to be successful. It's just a matter of time. All right, so that's my bodybuilding. Then on to learning. All right, so where do I start here? Curiosity. I've always been a curious person. I've never struggled in school. I've always got good grades, as I mentioned before. Or there were parts in my schooling journey where I didn't do as well as I know I could have. And most of the time, the reason was due to one of two things. Sport being the priority, for example, the rugby, and that would mean I had to leave lessons or, other things like competitions for running or swimming or things like that. And the other one was just being in an environment like that first secondary school I went to was much, much smarter than the second one. And so I remember just being in that environment in the first one, and my grades were higher because everyone else was so much smarter. When everyone else is pushing it, I'm going to push it. But in the second school, they were better at sports and they didn't value academics as much. I remember just taking my foot off the gas a bit because I could afford to. And then it was only before the GCSEs with that deadline coming up that I really, dialed in, and then, got, 3 sevens, 5 8s, and 3 9s. So didn't get a B, but I'm sure I could have got better if I'd had those standards held from that first secondary school all the way into the second one, instead of for maybe a year or two there not performing to the best that I know I could. Anyways, so philosophy is what I studied at university. Now, I think this links to those events that I was talking about earlier on. In year 12, so lower sixth in secondary school, they had a class called it was theology and philosophy. And this will be a whole nother can of worms, or just topic that I'm very interested in, is the topic of God. Right, so that was one big interest. And then I wanted to know about meaning, about why things matter, the different views on that, and ultimately, like, how to live a good life. Like, what does a good life mean? Everyone wants to be happy, everyone wants to live a good life. What does that actually mean, and what do the different schools of thought think? And I guess I naively went into it thinking I would actually find some answer, like in math or something, but, you know, pretty quickly you come to realize it's not as simple as that, and there's all these different views and contradictions, etc. And it's really very rarely black and white. And then from that, I had a really good teacher. Maybe one day I can have one of those teachers on the podcast. But I had a really good teacher or two teachers actually, that really did a good job, I think, at getting me to ask the right questions, getting the right mindset for philosophy, and really introduced me to the topic well enough that I was actually interested to go and research it on my own, because I just thought they were genuinely interesting questions. And then at university, I had the option to go to an English university, but by this time I thought I want to do bodybuilding, and just the chance that I could go to America, and I knew there was more bodybuilding opportunity out there. In the back of my mind, I took it. Right. Initially, I was trying to go looking at UCLA for rugby. And then, long story short, you can apply to the UC system. You apply to 4 universities minimum. I didn't even know what UCSB was. And I got into UCSB, and I was no longer passionate about rugby. And I went there, and yeah, well, the rest was history a little bit. So, and so another topic that I want to link here to learning is when I first started getting into podcasts. Right, this was in lockdown early on, and the reason I got into podcasts is actually because it was something to do with the bodybuilders in the UK. They would talk about getting a certain amount of steps per day, and I'd never heard of this before. My mum would constantly be saying, I'd late night walks with my mum in Wimbledon, and she would be obsessed with getting a 10k steps a day, and kind of like dismissed it because, you know, my mum, she does like, she's an extremely smart woman, but she do like these Asian workouts, you know, I don't want to, you know what I'm saying, but like, if you know people from Asia, they do like body weight squats, and me obviously knowing the gym, I know that's completely useless, but they'll do like body weight squats and things that think it actually does something. So when she was also doing the 10k steps, I was maybe like, you know, how effective really is that? You know, is it really necessary? But the bodybuilders, and actually from my knowledge now, yes, 8k steps minimum a day is great for health. But I started doing it because I was trying to do a bulk and I didn't want to get too fat. And so I started going on 10k walks at a golf course near my house. And I was like, what do I do when I'm walking? And that's when I started listening to podcasts. So I remember one of the first podcasts I listened to, obviously everyone knows Joe Rogan, has heard of him. I was fascinated to listen to people that were successful. I wanted to know the best people in their fields. Like I remember listening to one specifically George St. Pierre in the MMA. And this is actually, I was maybe going to name the podcast the Shoulders of Giants podcast, because he mentioned the quote, you know, if I've seen further, it's because I stood on the shoulders of giants. I think this is such a fascinating quote. And this is actually another reason, or links to why I want to do the podcast, right? I was reading a book called The Lessons of History by Will Durant. And it talks about biologically, we think we're so much better than the humans 2,000 years ago, but we barely changed. Like if they had the technology that we had today, they wouldn't be, you know, doing all these things that we almost laugh at, right? It's just because we have the technology and we have the knowledge put into books, etc., and learning, so we can act differently. But we're no better physically, really, than the human 2,000 years ago. So, point being with that, like, it kind of struck me there that, wow, like such a fundamental part of human civilization and progress is not to do with the biology changing, it's to do with the technology changing and passing on information and making the next generation better off or smarter than the generation before. And obviously, you know, the arguments and quality of life, but obviously it's undeniable we have a higher quality of life relatively than them. Obviously, in comparison to other people always compare themselves, but compared to the, you know, people living in, I don't know, Egypt, you know, we're far, far better off with aircon and all that stuff. Anyways, I was interested in people, and I wanted to know, how did these people think? You know, they have this, you know, external success, they've achieved these things, how do these people think? And I listened to tons and tons and tons of podcasts. And the common theme was I wanted to listen from successful people in a field. And that links to another one. This is actually a big part of the name for this podcast right now, the Mountain of Mastery. I think mastery is a topic which I'm fundamentally interested in. And if I'm to look at like what's the common denominator between all these people that I'm really interested in, they've mastered their craft or they've done very well at it. All right, so, you know, whether that be, you know, the MMA fighters that you had on, you know, people that were comedians or, you know, directors of movies like Steven Spielberg and George Lucas. And there's just so many to listen to. I remember listening to like Kevin Hart and all these, and I'll go on these walks late at night and I'll just be listening to the podcasts, and I got interested in them. And then throughout university, I'd always just be listening to podcasts. It was like something that I was almost hooked on. So the main ones I started listening to was Joe Rogan. I think someone else that I was really fascinated with was Jordan Peterson, answering these questions on, you know, meaning in your life and it to do with bearing more responsibility, and just had no idea about politics and just learning a bit more about that and how to orient yourself in the world and the psychology behind, you know, how we associate positive feelings with moving towards a goal. And I think this was all just, you know, it links so many dots in my head that I feel like I'd maybe just become aware of, but the way he spoke, I was so like, I was just fascinated that a human could speak that well and articulate himself so well. And what this links to, the podcasting, because I think right now a big motivation for me actually starting it is to do with reading. Let me tell you about that, because this has been a new thing which I haven't really done much in my life. Obviously, I studied philosophy, so you suppose you have to read a lot, right? Obviously, I went to good schools and they make you read books, but I'd never really been too interested in them. I do remember, however, that I'd read series. Like I'd read, you know, Harry Potter when I was younger. I read the Percy Jackson series. I read The Hunger Games. I remember there were points where I would be in a book and I'd be deeply in the book, very deeply in the book. But then there'll be a sign, I remember, like Of Mice of Men or George Orwell 1984 in school, and it was a pain to read. I didn't want to do it. My attention span wasn't there. But interesting enough, I was reading a book called The Almanac of Naval Ravikant, and he talks about, you know, reading being super important. And he says, you know, one of the questions is, you know, how do you get into reading? He said, you need to read what you follow your genuine curiosity first. And then when you love reading, then go into the rest of it. And my story, honestly, is the story which kind of got the momentum going again, is just before university, I read the entire book series of Harry Potter 1 to 8, you know, in maybe 2 or 3 weeks. And that honestly cultivated a genuine, obviously, as I said, I'd read like Percy Jackson and a couple of these other like Hunger Games and things like that when I was younger. But this kind of had a spark, which I, you know, hadn't been reading books consistently, and that changed the game. Like, I love Harry Potter. I'm not ashamed of it. And that links to now, because in university, I would be listening to podcasts, and then there was this app called Speechify. And when you're bodybuilding and have all these different tasks to do, the day's so busy, going to lectures, going to the library, going to the gym, going to my part-time job. I'd work at this, at the front desk at a gym, and I'd be listening to everything. I'd be listening to lectures. I'd be listening to, I'd make notes before an exam, and I'd listen to the thing on Speechify, and I'd listen to audiobooks, and I'd listen to podcasts, and I'd listen to, so when they had like assigned readings, I'd upload them as a PDF and I'd listen to them. So I didn't do too much reading, to be honest. But now moving to Houston, I'm alone 99% of the time. There's a couple of times I train with some guys in the gym, but most of the time I'm working on the business, and, you know, I have a lot of time to myself. So yes, I do listen to some podcasts, but I've been reading a lot. I've read probably 15 or 20 books in the last couple months. I actually have a list here just to give you guys an idea of you know, maybe also look back in a couple of years and I'll be interested by what I've been reading. So, a couple books: Influence by Robert Cialdini, Shoe Dog by Phil Knight, How to Win Friends and Influence People, Winning by Tim Grover, Michael Jordan, The Life, Grit, Total Recall, Arnold, The 10X Rule, Michael Jordan, Driven from Within, Open, Andre Agassi, The Lesson of History, Will Durant, The Psychology of Money, The Alchemist, Steve Jobs, Walter Isaacson, The War of Art by Stephen Pressfield, $100 billion Offers, The Almanac of Navarre Ravikant, Deep Work, and then some fiction books. Also Start With Why. So yeah, I'll read some fiction books too. I've read Ready Player 2. I read this series called Mistborn. It was a trilogy. And I read Hawthorne Legacy. And I read Aragon. And if I'm being real, I wanted some fiction, just to, because I like the idea of being in taking your mind somewhere else, right? Like, I like The Lord of the Rings, I like Harry Potter, and I literally looked up, what are similar books where they have, a universe where I can almost imagine myself in that universe. I remember in prep, when I did my first bodybuilding prep, I would be doing the cardio and I'd just be imagining myself, in a certain alternate reality. And I don't know, I'd like it. And when I work, I sometimes listen to ambience in the background, and I imagine myself in a certain, one of these worlds. Anyways, I digress. I've been interested in lots of books to do with these three topics, right? Like bodybuilding, listen to people like Arnold. I've been interested in entrepreneurship, business. And yeah, I guess I'll get onto that right now. The reason I've been so interested in business is, if I'm being honest, I was never this entrepreneur since a young age. There's people who had friends that, at Wimbledon tennis, they would go give out water bottles. They'll buy them for, super cheap, and they'll sell them, when the demand's high and it's super hot on a summer's day when people are playing Wimbledon tennis and these guys have more money, right? Great idea now. But I had zero interest in business. I just cared about sport. And I don't know, not much else, right? I was always just doing sport. But one of the biggest reasons I got interested in it is because as a bodybuilder, it's not like a soccer player or football player. My English friends will crucify me for saying soccer, but it's not like it where you get paid off just doing the sport alone, or it's very hard to. The reality is that most people doing bodybuilding monetize it by either working a 9-to-5 job, or they have their own business. People, successful people, have a business, or they have great sponsorships and deals, etc. So I was interested in social media since about age maybe 16, 17. But I know that even if you have sponsorships and, clothing sponsorships, it's dependent on the audience, and it's not as sustainable or as good of a foundation as simply having your own business. So, from my excessive research into bodybuilding and learning about the craft, I invested into sites like, J3U. I've watched all the videos. I've invested into books like Brad Schoenfield. I've learned a lot to try and be the best bodybuilder I can be. So in the process, I've gained a lot of expertise. And through that, I'm now coaching multiple, dozens of clients. I've coached dozens of clients, online coaching to help them gain muscle, lose body fat. And that is off the back of having the knowledge and expertise in this specific domain, and then being able to help other people achieve their fitness goals. Because I have the knowledge and I've been coached as well, so I understand the process and what it takes to get someone a desired outcome. But obviously, you don't just say, I want to be an online coach, and then it suddenly magically appears and you're making all the money in the world. You need to figure it out, and no one's going to teach it for you. So really, that's how my curiosity led me into business. And I think also just in general, I wouldn't say I've been super entrepreneurial, but I've always wondered, how do people make a living? You go in the airport and you'll be flying on a plane, or I've gone to tons of different places in the world now, right? I go to Korea, I've been in San Diego, beautiful place, been to Boston now, and I just go around places in Houston. I just look around and I just wonder, what do people do for a living? And I look at successful people and I think, what did they do to be able to achieve this? I've been to, Newport Beach, and I've been to Laguna Beach, Hollywood Hills, and I've seen these houses and I think, man, there's so many people, but what do these people do to stand out? How do they become the anomalies and rise above the rest? I've always just been very interested. How do these people think? Because if you do what everyone else does, you get the results that everyone else gets. So, all that to say that my interest for business was really born out of figuring out how can I be the best bodybuilder. That was the fundamental drive, which, if you could be a bodybuilder and make a great living off just bodybuilding alone, even at this age that I'm at or level that I'm at, then I probably wouldn't be interested in business. Or maybe I'd be interested in the people, and I'd still be interested in mastery, the concept of mastering a craft, but I wouldn't be so concerned on, business as it pertains to making a living, right? But I've learned so much, and it's developed me so much as a person, and I've experienced a lot, which I definitely did not anticipate for my life, but at this age, I've learned so much now about marketing, about sales, about human psychology, about human nature. And, when it comes to selling a service, there is so much that goes into it. And not only learning from people, I've invested in mentorships, but one of the most recent podcasts, which I absolutely love, is the Founders Podcast. And this was actually a big motivation for me making the podcast myself, because I listened to David Senra, is the name of the host, and he talks about history's greatest entrepreneurs and founders, and I just love hearing the mindset and the way these people think. They have books written about them, and he talks about the power of autobiographies and how there's entire life lessons, or there's billions of dollars worth of information in a $30 history book. And so from this, it just seemed like a no-brainer. Like, I'm interested in people. I want to know why they think the way they do. I want to learn the lessons they've learned. Either you learn the hard way or the harder way. You learn the harder way by experiencing negative things yourself and having to learn from experience. Or you can just learn the hard way and put in the effort and actually learn the lessons from all these successful people that have come before you. So from that's why that was a big kind of, it just clicked, and it made so much sense. And with this free time that I have right now, I spend a lot of time reading, especially before bed, lower the cortisol before sleeping, because sleep is so important as a bodybuilder. But back to the mission of the podcast. Sorry if it's been a bit disjointed. I'm sure that will improve as time goes on. But linking the learning, my interest in podcasts and listening to them, and learning from books now, and also just podcasting in general, these three topics in my life: bodybuilding, entrepreneurship, plus business, and just learning about being a master in a field. This combined together, and also to do with marketing, just the concept of marketing, I think relating to my business, that wouldn't be the main driver. It could be maybe like a secondary benefit, but I want to share this knowledge that I learn from books, from my own research, and down the line from people who are successful in the fields that I'm interested in, and share that with the world, because I feel like my curiosity will allow me to bring out sides of the people that I'm interviewing in a way that most likely has not been brought out before. And it won't be artificial, superficial, because if there is someone that I genuinely respect, then I absolutely want to know why they think the way they do and learn the lessons that they've learned. And why not, if I can do a good job of that, share that with the world so as many other people can benefit from it as possible. I think that is killing two birds with one stone, if you ask me. Lastly, I want to link, and this is hopefully a prediction, but I feel like it makes so much sense to me in regards to what I've learned about marketing and about a gap I see in the market from being someone who loves bodybuilding and just in these spaces of, I guess, personal development, just understanding people's philosophies, entrepreneurship. And that is that social media has taken off, right? Personal branding is the new big buzzword. But I don't like the fact that if you're trying to market a product or service in business, one of the biggest things that you don't want to be is a commodity, right? You don't want to be in a red ocean, which means like, the reason it's called a red ocean is, it's like there's blood everywhere and there's so much blood that the ocean turns red. You want to be in a blue ocean. And I read this in a book called Blue Ocean Strategy. And how do you go and also the first law of marketing and the 22 immutable laws of marketing is you have to be the first mover. And obviously there's other people that have a podcast, but how many 22-year-olds do I know that have a consistent podcast that is growing and growing and is taking a unique angle on these three topics. They say find your niche and whatever, but I don't think it's a smart idea to find a niche by trying to superficially be something you're not. But if you have interest in certain things, like this whole podcast has just explained my three top interests of bodybuilding, entrepreneurship, business, and learning and mastery. If there's a medium where I can channel this information and provide some kind of value, even if a podcast is the slowest growing medium, if it doesn't stop, then the power of compound interest will, over time, be beneficial, right? Everyone wants to go on Instagram or TikTok because it's short and you get quick results and immediate feedback. But I've heard, from Chris Williamson and David Senra talking about, it took 4 or 5 years for both of them to actually get some success of consistently doing the podcast. But it's like growing muscle in the gym. And, as a bodybuilder, I know all about that. There's no amount of work. You can work the hardest. You can do the hardest workout ever, and it's still going to take time to grow muscle. It doesn't happen overnight. But on the other hand, people are so drawn to things like TikTok and Instagram because the second you get one post, it can go viral. And then you get all this instant gratification, instant feedback. But the problem with that is likely it's not going to last. Right? It keeps you coming back and you need to post more and more and more. And, if you're following the algorithm, there's a whole thing about, there's a joke that, if you're a woman and you just follow the algorithm, pretty soon you're going to be naked. Point being, that algorithm can take you away from what your calling is or what you're deeply interested in or what you feel like you can share with the world. And it just gets you chasing these vanity metrics. Like you want to get a certain number of likes, views, etc. for this social status, but you're losing touch with why you start in the first place, to either like genuinely document your journey or to share and maybe help a certain kind of person. But for me, I think that not only is it red ocean, it's hard to stand anyways with the value I provide. This medium makes sense to me as a person because I like deep conversations. I like learning why people think, and I want to go in depth. Right? I feel like a short form 60-second video max or a reel. How deep can you go in that format? Someone could make the best 60-second video and I still have no idea who they are as a person. Like, I want to know who someone is at their core. Right? And so do other people, and not only is that just good, I think, in general as humans, for business, right? To buy from someone, you need to know, like, and trust them. How are you going to know, like, and trust someone from a superficial photo or even videos? I'm not saying they're all superficial, but in compared to a podcast, of course, they're superficial because you can go deeper, right? And this is my prediction that it's a blue ocean. It will take a long time to grow, but again, I'm linking this all to, again, David Senra and this Chris Williamson podcast because I think it was such a good podcast. And they're talking about, you have to do what's hard and it needs to be valuable, but you need to be swimming downstream, right? For me, I know that as a bodybuilder, the physique is cool, but I'm more interested in the mental and the mindset as well behind it. I believe that these top athletes, their mind is actually the coolest thing. It's not just the external, how fast someone is, how fast they can swim or run, or how high they can jump, or how big their muscles are. It's the mindset that gets them to that point, right? And so if that's the most valuable thing, then the platform and the medium needs to be aligned with that. And I think a long form medium does a better job at doing that. So to summarize that, I think for business, not only for the know, like, and trust factor, I think doing something that's downstream that you genuinely enjoy. I genuinely enjoy having good conversations and learning about why people think. And I think bodybuilding, especially bodybuilders, there's such a stigma. And there's people that have gone and changed it a bit, but around, people are so isolated. You have your meals every single day. You have the training that you cannot miss. You have the recovery, and your life is so regimented. And your circle has to be small as a consequence, or there's just no way you're going to be a great bodybuilder. That I'm sure there's all these great stories that these people have, these high performers have, and they could help a lot of people, but they're not being told to the world because there's no medium or platform for them to do so. And this will be good for everyone, because if someone has a great story and they can share it, then people are going to buy more into them as well. And, it's just going to be a win-win-win, right? So in summary, in this podcast, episode 1, thank you if you made it to the end of the video. I've covered, my founder's story, my main values of bodybuilding, entrepreneurship / business, and learning / wanting to be a master at your craft. And yeah, I've gone into the information about trying to be an athlete or view myself as an athlete. You know, we first started with rugby and now bodybuilding. I've talked about my learning and just that inherent curiosity that I've had since a young age, and how that's, you know, manifested in school, in university, in what I choose to try and learn right now, and why I'm learning what I'm learning, with regards to, you know, trying to just learn for the sake of it, trying to learn more about the world, how it works, the people that have made an impact and that gone on to do great things, like how did they think, and how can I learn and share their lessons so that, you know, you can learn the hard way instead of the hardest way, you know, from the pain of making the mistakes yourself when you could have just learned them. And hopefully I've shared the kind of mission, the purpose of the podcast. It's selfish in a way, and I'm not afraid to admit that, you know, if I'm interviewing people, or, you know, even if I'm sharing a solo podcast, which I plan on doing on a book or something I've learned, you know, they say that you learn it more if you're able to teach it, right? So this is not purely altruistic, and I'm not claiming for it to be, but I think it's definitely valuable that if I have a guest on and I can, for my own selfish reasons, try and learn about them and I can share it, that's going to be valuable. And if there's things that I learn and I'm trying to teach it so I can learn more as well, well, when I'm teaching it, that's definitely going to be good for the listener, provided I could do a good job, which I believe I can, and is going to improve as time goes on. So you made it to the end of the video. I highly appreciate you. Hope to provide a lot of value and consistent episodes from just myself and guests. And I look forward to seeing you next episode. Thank you.